So we're going to dive in this morning because 2 weeks ago, we've been going through Ruth the past several weeks. Last week, we took a little bit of break for Christmas specials. And so 2 weeks ago, I left you on a little bit of a cliffhanger. For those that didn't read the book, Ruth had asked Boaz to marry her. So, 3,000 years ago, we have a woman asking a guy to marry her, and to become her redeemer. And he told her last time that he really, really wanted to, but legally, he needed to ask one other guy first, who was actually a closer relative, and he had first right to be the redeemer. And so he was going to have to go and talk to him first. And she went back home, and she was asked to wait and wait and wait. So this morning, we're going to find out what happens. We're going to find out really quick, because I'm going to walk through these first 10 verses just really, really quick, so that we can get to the verses that I really want us to spend time on this morning. So a little bit of background before we hit these 10 verses, just so you understand what's going on in these 10 verses before we read them. There was no courthouse back then, okay? You couldn't go to a courthouse and get legal documents drawn up and all of those types of things. That didn't exist back then. And so normally the legal way that they did business back then was they would find the person that they were doing business with, and then they would find witnesses that would hear the verbal exchange and the verbal promises, and those witnesses would then act as the legal backing. And preferably, those witnesses would be elders in the town. And so the elders would serve as kind of the legal written document that, oh yeah, this happened. And then back then, in that time, what they would seal the deal by one of them would take off their sandal and hand it to the other person, and that would be kind of a seal the deal type of thing. Why? I don't know. It's kind of lost to antiquity as to why that was the case, what significance that had, but that was the seal the deal type thing. So we're going to watch this play out in these first 10 verses together. So let's read through them. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. And then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, but it is in the presence of those sitting here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he, that's the other guy, said, "I will redeem it." And then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So, when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. And then Boaz said to the elders and all of the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." All right. So Boaz sits down at the gate, and that was the place to be because everybody eventually went through the gate. That's where people congregated. That's kind of the water cooler of the town. Everybody eventually went through there, and the elders generally congregated there as well in case there was anything that they needed to do. And sure enough, this relative comes by. Boaz pulls him aside, sits him down, brings in the elders, and then tells them the deal. And at first, the guy is like, yeah, I'll buy the land. But then he learns that, oh, but you also acquire Ruth to be your wife. And suddenly he's like, no deal, no deal. Well, what's the deal with that? It's not that he has anything against Ruth. It's the fact that because he's a kinsman redeemer, it means that a son that would be born to him through Ruth would not legally be his. It would carry the name of her past husband. This was the practice that we've talked about numerous times in the past few weeks. This kinsman redeemer, where they didn't want the line, the name to die off, and so they would give the right to a kinsman redeemer to be able to perpetuate the line. So this son, if there was a son, would then take the name of Mahlon. And the addition to that is that when he was old enough, the land that the man had purchased from Naomi would then belong to him. It would belong to this boy. And this guy didn't like that. Presumably he had other kids, and so he's thinking of his inheritance and thinking, this will totally mess up the inheritance that I've got going on for myself and for the rest of my kids. This kid will own all of this stuff because that's his right, and I don't want anything to do with that. You see, he was willing to do this. He was willing to be the redeemer if it profited him, if he got this land, but not if he had to sacrifice something to do it. And the reality is that's not what a redeemer is. That's not what a redeemer does. There is always sacrifice involved when it comes to being a redeemer. Always. The redeemer always has to be willing to pay a price. A redeemer gives. A redeemer doesn't take. And we're going to see this with Boaz, but ultimately this morning, I want us to see this with Jesus being our Redeemer. And so the deal is made, and after the deal is made, the elders of the town, the ones that have now confirmed this, would be asked to give a traditional blessing, which they do. Look at the next two verses. And then all of the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." And so the blessing that the elders and the people give in this moment is threefold. Three blessings. Number one blessing is that Ruth would have many kids. I hope that Ruth is like Leah and Rachel. Remember, they had 12 sons and several daughters in the mix there. And so they're saying, man, I hope you have many, many kids. The second blessing, and really the last two, are for Boaz. The second blessing, which is for Boaz, is that he would grow in riches and grow in renown. He would grow in riches and grow in renown. And the third blessing is that Boaz and his descendants would be famous in Bethlehem and beyond, just like Perez was famous in that land. And Perez, of course, is a descendant, an ancestor, I should say, of Boaz. So that Ruth would have many kids, that Boaz would grow in riches and renown, and that their descendants would be famous in Bethlehem and beyond. Now, we're not told how many kids Ruth and Boaz had. We know they're about to have one, but we don't know beyond that. But for these other two, these people, as they're giving this blessing, they have no idea how fitting their blessing's going to be. They have no idea how God is about to answer this blessing. But first we have, finally, the marriage. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. So in this one little verse, we have at the very least, 9 months worth of things happening here. The marriage finally happens. The climax of the story, they finally get married. And in one fell swoop, in the same sentence, she conceives. And they're having a son. This is everything we've been waiting for in the book of Ruth. And in reality, the book could have just ended right here, couldn't it? I mean, this is the happily ever after. If we're just reading a nice story, this would be kind of where the story probably ends. It's nice and neat. And we could have moved from this verse 13, right to the second half of verse 17 and on to the end, and it would have finished nice and neat and succinct. Let's read it as if that were true. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Abinadab. Abinadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. Now that's a story right there. That is an awesome ending. It sounds like it goes together. But curiously, there are 3.5 verses in between verse 13 and where I connected it in verse 17 here. Why are these 3.5 verses there? I mean, surely we could have just ended it nice and neat, right? The reason why these 3.5 verses that we've not yet covered are there is because Ruth and Boaz aren't the only main characters in this story. In fact, I would argue maybe they're not even the two main characters in this story. I think that there is someone else in this story that I would put at the top of the list in terms of main characters. And that is Naomi. Naomi. The book of Ruth begins with Naomi and her husband and her 2 sons as they leave Bethlehem. They flee Bethlehem and they arrive in Moab. Why did they flee? Because there was famine in the land in Bethlehem, and they didn't trust God that he could provide for their needs there. And so they fled in terror, and they left and went to the land that was their enemy's land, the land where God said, do not go there. And as a result, while she's there, she loses her husband, and she loses her 2 sons. But it wasn't just the people. Because she lost her husband and her 2 sons, she lost her joy. She lost her faith, her trust in God. She lost her hope. She lost her peace. And she became bitter and depressed. And so finally, as we saw in chapter 1, when she learns that Bethlehem is doing better and she's got nothing here in Moab, she decides to return to Bethlehem, and her two daughters-in-law are following along with, but if you remember, she turned back around and said, "Don't go with me. Don't go with me." And what was her explanation? "Don't go with me because I'm cursed. This is my lot in life. It's not going to get any better than this. In fact, I fully expect it to get worse. My life is messed up beyond hope. We went down the wrong road. God will never forgive me. This is my lot in life. Nothing is ever going to change. I am who I am. This is what it is. I have nothing good to look forward to. My life from here on out is meaningless." That was her heart. I don't see this ever getting better. Let me ask you, and answer honestly in your heart. When you think about these two characters, Ruth, Naomi, Ruth, who throughout the book of Ruth never seems to do anything wrong. She has this faith that is just awe-inspiring. It's just amazing. She leaves everything behind, doesn't seemingly think anything of it, has all of this faith to conquer mountains, does all of these things. And then you have Naomi that's struggling. Which one of the two can you generally identify with more? Ruth or Naomi? I think if we're honest, most of us, a lot of the time, can identify with Naomi more than we can identify with Ruth. If you ever, or maybe lately, looked really, really close in the mirror, I'm not talking about just looked at it to make sure there weren't any hairs in place, or make sure you shaved the right spots, or put on the makeup right. I mean, just really took a moment to look in the mirror and just stare at yourself and look into your own eyes. Not many of us dare to do that, because I'm going to take a stab, a guess here. Most of us don't really like what we see when we look that deeply at ourselves. Many of us, if not most or even all of us, to some degree judge ourselves by any number of different life factors that we have going on. Maybe it's other people's opinions. And, we're living in a world right now where it just seems like everybody's cynical and everybody's mean, and nobody has a good opinion about anybody. And so if you're judging yourself based on other people's opinions of you, you probably don't have a very good outlook of yourself. Or maybe you look in the mirror, and if you really look down deep at yourself, what you see are your failures. And they could be real failures, because we all have failed at different things in our life. Or they could be perceived failures. Nobody else thinks that you failed doing this, but you sure do. And when you look at yourself in the mirror, the first thing you see, man, I really messed up. Really messed up. Or maybe when you look in the mirror, what you see are regrets. I wish I would have done this way back then. I wish I wouldn't have done this. my life would be so different today if I just had made a different choice here. And when you really look at yourself in the mirror, that's what you see, the regrets. Or maybe you see wishes when you look in the mirror. I wish I was more like. I wish I could do this. Man, this person is so gifted at this. I wish I could be like that. I wish I could look like this. I wish I was confident like this person. I wish. And all you see in the mirror are ways that you don't measure up the way you wish you measured up. Or maybe you look in the mirror and all you can see is your present situation. Maybe you're in a job that you hate. Maybe you don't have a job. Maybe your home is a disaster. Maybe your marriage is a disaster, or maybe your marriage is over. And you look at your present situation, and that's what you see when you look in the mirror. That's Naomi. And that's you and me. I mean, really, is there anyone that looks in the mirror? Is there anyone that looks, maybe there's one or two of you, I don't know. But is there anyone that looks in the mirror and says, yes, oh, look at that, yes, I am everything I always dreamed of being. I'm doing everything I always dreamed of doing. I'm completely at peace with my life. I already heard there's one person that's already said no, right? You already confessed up to that in your testimony time. But I think most of us are in the same boat. Maybe we don't have the same dreams that never were realized, but there's something else. I always dreamed this for my life. I always dreamed that, and man, it's just never happened. And now I'm over 52, and what's my life become? That's Naomi through most of this book. She's looking at herself in the mirror and she's thinking, this is not how I pictured my life going. And I have no one to blame but myself. That's what she has to look at in the mirror until this baby is born. Look at verse 14. And then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. This is what the women are saying as they come up to here, and this baby is born to Ruth. They're going to Naomi. They're not going to Ruth. They're going to Naomi. And this is what they're saying here. They're saying, Naomi, God hasn't abandoned you. I know you felt like that. God hasn't abandoned you. He's with you, and he's provided a redeemer, a savior, someone who's going to help you and rescue you and take care of you. And that someone is this little baby when he grows up. He's going to do all these things. This little baby is going to be your redeemer. You see, Boaz was Ruth's redeemer, this little child. This little child's going to be Naomi's redeemer. And you know, as we move past what, let's be honest, has been a really hard 2023. Some of you need to hear what these women say to Naomi just as much as Naomi needed to hear it. God has not abandoned you. He hasn't. He is with you. And by the way, that's the hope of Christmas. God with us. 3,000 years ago, this little baby was born to be a redeemer for Naomi. 2,000 years ago, a baby was born to be the redeemer of the whole world. God with us. And he's here to help you and to rescue you and to take care of you. What does that look like? What does a redeemer do? Look at verse 15. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons has given birth to him. So there's 2 things that the women say about this child, this redeemer, that this is what a redeemer is. This is what a redeemer does. Number 1, he is a restorer. Restorer of what? Of life. That word restorer means to turn back. It means to change. It means to do or start over. And what God is saying in this passage about a redeemer is that a redeemer speaks into and redeems your past. It's what a redeemer is meant to do. He speaks into and redeems your past. He makes everything new. You get a do-over with the redeemer. Because many of us are looking in that mirror and we're thinking, but I've failed. You don't understand, in my life, I messed up. I failed. I didn't do this, or I did do this. And we're haunted by our past, by the mistakes that we made, by the sins that we committed, by the missed opportunities that we have. But Jesus is looking at you in that mirror. The Redeemer is looking at you in that mirror, and he's saying, no, 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 no. I have made all things new. Hear me this morning. Jesus the Redeemer is a restorer, intent to make everything new in your life. As we head into 2024, would you let Jesus be your Redeemer? To let him heal your past? To let him forgive your past sin? To lift you past your mistakes? And to give you new opportunities? That's what a Redeemer does. He restores your past. But that's not all he does. The passage there also says that he is a nourisher. This Redeemer, this child, was to be a nourisher for Naomi. Our Redeemer, the child that was born for us, is meant to be a nourisher for us as well. That word nourisher means to hold. It means to supply. It means to sustain. And it was often used, for instance, in providing food in the time of a famine, that food would sustain you while everything around you is in chaos and not going well. You see, because a Redeemer speaks into and redeems your present, not just your past, your present. Many of us, because it's been a really hard year, are haunted by our present circumstances, by our present sorrows, by our present pains. It's been a hard few years. And the reality is that a new year, simply turning into 2024, is not going to magically erase all the pain. It's just not. But Jesus, our Redeemer, looks at us and he proclaims, I'm here. I'm with you. You're not alone. Trust in me to provide for you in this time of famine in your life. Trust in me to sustain you, to give you strength when you don't feel like you can go on. That's who he is. That's our Redeemer. And the question becomes, will you let Jesus be your Redeemer this year to speak into your present? Well, the passage then goes on, verse 16 through the end. And then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Keep going. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Abinadab. Abinadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. So there, as we transitioned into verse 16, we have this picture of Naomi picking up the child and beginning to nurse him. That word nurse means guardian. She has taken over guardianship of this child because this child is her Redeemer. And it's not mom and dad that name the child, it's the women of the city. They name him Obed, and the name Obed means servant. Servant. Does that description define anybody else? How about the suffering servant, Jesus? And then we learn that it's really not just about Obed, but it's about people down the line. Obed, the father of Jesse, the father of David. That's King David, by the way. You know, for us, there's no surprise here, right? Most of you have read this before. Most of you kind of know the story. And so for you, it's like, okay, this genealogy, kind of move on here. It's enough. We're done. There's no shock and awe for us. But for those who are just reading it for the first time, back then as well as maybe today, there should be shock and awe. Because up until now, we've read through 4 chapters, and it's been this nice story about faith. It's been this nice story about this redemption of this family. And, it should bring some feels, right? This is really nice. But that's all it is this nice little story. But then we get to this end part, and if you've not read it before, if you didn't know, there should be shock and awe. It's like, oh, this has gigantic implications. This isn't just about some random nice family of redemption. This is the backstory. This is the prequel of David. Probably the most famous Jew that you could ever name. This is King David's beginnings. This is his family. And what this does is this turns the corner to looking ahead, is it shows us that the Redeemer speaks not just into our past and not just into our present, but the Redeemer speaks into our future. Our future. Naomi thought her life and her purpose was over. But all the while, the Redeemer was busy giving her a new purpose. And not just any purpose, a mighty purpose, being the great, great grandmother of King David. Whoa. That would be huge. But that's not the end of the story. Look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Jesus is in the line of David. Now, you'll thank me later. I'm not going to read through the entire genealogy as it shows in Matthew. But it walks through all the names that we've already read at the end of the genealogy in Ruth. It walks through all of those and then adds in all of the ones after that, all the way to Joseph, and then to the baby born of Mary, Jesus. And Naomi, the woman looking in the mirror thinking, my life is over. Well, she's the great, however many greats, grandmother of the Savior of the world. What a purpose. The Redeemer redeems your past and your present and your future. And so as we head into 2024, will you allow Jesus to speak into your future? To give you new purpose? Maybe he's allowed a dream to die. But I guarantee you, where he allows a dream to die, he causes another dream to bloom. That's even better. My hope and prayer for all of us is as we move into 2024, that we would look in the mirror and instead of seeing our past, instead of seeing our mistakes, instead of seeing our failures, instead of seeing all of the opinions of others, instead of seeing all of these things, we would look in and see Jesus' eyes and him saying, no, I am your Redeemer, and I have redeemed your past, and I am redeeming your present, and I will redeem your future. You can trust in me because I am with you. I don't know what 2024 holds, but this I know. He's with you. Couple questions as we end our time this morning. What parts of your past have you not allowed Jesus to redeem, that you're just holding on to and holding over yourself? Will you allow him to redeem your past, all of it? Are you trusting Jesus to sustain you in your present circumstances? And what would that look like in the coming year? And then finally, do you believe that God can redeem and give purpose and direction to your future? And will you let him? Think about those things. Ponder those things as we move into 2024 and see what God might do in your life. Would you pray with me? Lord Jesus, thank you for the book of Ruth. It has been such a blessing to take time out and read through. And as much as I admire Ruth and her faith and courage, I recognize myself in Naomi. And so, Lord, I'm thankful. I'm so thankful to you that you're my Redeemer. Be our Redeemer as we move into this next year. We ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for being here this morning. Blessings to you as you move into a new year. And may we all come back next Sunday to worship and to give honor and praise to God as we begin a trek back into the book of Luke. This time we're actually going to finish, as we are now on the road to the cross, and we're going to finish up around Easter. So we've walked through Christmas. Now let's look at the cross. You are dismissed.